Hi everybody, Dana Litwin here again with more Tuesday tips for leaders of volunteers. And this week, talking about what is your leadership style. I'm going to go through a few different types of leadership style and different categories that are most effective, sometimes effective, and usually rarely or hardly ever effective. And this is also a little bit of a preview for a live webinar interactive workshop I'm doing online for America's Service Commission's national training this week on June 8th. If you happen to see this video when it first comes out on Tuesday, June 6th, that's great. I think there's still time for you to register for my session and all the other amazing sessions and presenters on this two-day conference, June 7th and 8th. So I'll put those links in the description so you can check it out. But these are also just great tips in general. It's very useful to know your own leadership style and how it's progressed and when you can understand it enough to adjust it and change it and align it with the objectives of your team, your organization, your career. So being aware of your default settings in leadership is especially helpful. Sometimes we act differently under stress than under ideal circumstances. So again, kind of knowing yourself and what you tend to do, if you recognize any of these in yourself, then that's just very useful information because what leadership style you have directly impacts the rest of your team, the success of the organization, and it can also help with your understanding of how others are responding to you and how your leadership styles influencing them for better or worse. And when you do understand how your leadership style, communication, personality style, type, whatever that is for you, and how it kind of can shift and change, that makes you automatically a more inspirational and effective leader when you understand these things about yourself. So the most effective leadership styles are typically very based in trust and equity and kind of thinking about the greater good. So the first leadership style, and you've probably heard this a lot, especially in faith communities, is servant leadership. And that is a leadership style that's supportive and shares power. The servant leadership style is based on the idea that leaders prioritize serving the greater good instead of their own personal agenda or objectives if they're not aligned with a greater good. And leaders with this style typically think about serving their team and organization first. They don't prioritize their own objectives, and employees in a servant leadership environment are much more likely to feel like their voices are heard. That's true of volunteers as well. Another very effective leadership style is the coaching style, and that nurtures individual strengths among the team members. This aims to build strong relationships and addresses the unique needs of each individual team member. This tends to work a little better in smaller organizations, but it really can be scaled up to any size agency. And coaching leaders typically take more of a mentor-mentee approach to their leadership, focusing on a balance of praise, support, and constructive feedback. Another very effective leadership style is called democratic and kind of more, in a more modern sense, sociocratic. You're going to hear that word from me a lot more often. I'm writing some articles with other colleagues for Engage around care circles and sociocracy, so I'll put some links for you to understand that a little better. But a democratic or sociocratic leadership style means that all have an equal say, and consent and consensus is how decisions are made. This also can be considered a flat organizational structure. Very many up-and-coming tech companies, or even some well-established tech companies, have a very flat, non-hierarchical or less hierarchical structure, and that's kind of what this can lead to. The democratic or sociocratic leaders welcome and value others' input. They rely heavily on team participation. They are trusting the expertise of all members of their team, paid or unpaid. And they facilitate discussions that enable multiple members of the group to weigh in and be empowered to make decisions. The final most effective leadership style is strategic, and this is usually very data driven and intersectional. It balances the needs of the team with the needs and mission and cause of the agency. And strategic leadership is when managers use their creative and their team members' creative problem solving skills with a strategic vision, a very clear strategic vision, to help all of the team members and an organization achieve its long-term goals. So that's the short list. There's a lot more detail and nuance to that. And again, I'll link to a lot more resources to look up all of the interesting additional information about these leadership styles and little quizzes and things like that. But the next group are leadership styles that, again, can be very popular or widespread, but they're only sometimes effective. And this is because they either have too little trust or too much trust without enough structure or supervision balancing it out. So a transactional leadership style is exactly how it sounds. It's kind of quid pro quo. It's based on the idea that managers give employees something that they want in exchange for getting something that the leader or the agency wants. It posits that workers are not self-motivated and require a lot of structure, instruction, and monitoring in order to complete tasks correctly and on time. So again, this is like a low level of trust in each other, in team members, or in the agency that leads to this very transactional type of leadership style. Another sometimes effective, but not as effective as the first few leadership style, is called laissez-faire. And the French term literally translates to let them do. So this is the other end of the trust scale, where leaders who embrace laissez-faire style really afford nearly all authority to their team members. And although this can be very empowering to people by trusting them to work however they'd like, the problem can come up where it limits their development, and it can limit the overlook completely a critical capacity or growth opportunities or opportunities to change without enough structure to have conversations about that. And when everyone's just kind of doing their own thing, there can be a lack of coordination or collaboration as well. But again, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. The other sometimes effective leadership style, which has been super popular I've been noticing last like 10 years especially, and we talk about this a lot in volunteer engagement in the nonprofit sector, is a transformational leadership style. Now that sounds great. We, in general, want transformational experiences over transactional experiences or just do whatever you want experiences. But transformational leadership can be less effective when it's always transforming and improving upon the team's or agency's conventions. So it can tip over the scales of unstable, or feeling chaotic. The team might have a basic set of tasks or goals that they complete every week or month, but the leader is constantly pushing them outside of their comfort zone. And this can be exhausting and stressful and lead to confusion and burnout if there is a mismatch of this leadership style with the culture of the agency or the mission or the cause or the individual styles of the team members. So those are sometimes effective, kind of depends on the context and circumstances. And then my favorites, and by favorites I mean not at all my favorites, the rarely effective but unfortunately all too common leadership styles that have zero or very, very low trust in the team members, and that creates low trust with the organization or the agency itself, often further out into the community. So the autocratic and bureaucratic leadership styles, again, rarely effective, but I think anyone watching this video has probably had a boss that's been a micromanager or worked for an agency. I've worked a lot in government agencies where this has been the case, where there's so much bureaucratic red tape and there's so many steps to a process, especially onboarding volunteers, that it becomes almost impossible to complete that task correctly. So an autocratic leadership style can be a cult of personality. This can also kind of tie into founders syndrome with nonprofits or longtime board members, or this happens in for-profit companies a lot as well with founder syndrome. But an autocratic leadership style really creates a fearful, toxic culture of punishment, a sense of punishment outside of very, very strict compliance. It also can lead to a very toxic culture where politicking and appearances are more important than truth, facts, and data. And that can be very harmful for mission impact and tends to lead to a lot of turnover and burnout and churn with the paid employees and with the volunteers when there isn't a lot of trust and everyone's walking on eggshells, or they feel like, the big boss who should just be leading with vision and bigger strategies is micromanaging people. That's very unpleasant for all involved. And the bureaucratic, also rarely effective style, but again, just very common in older institutions and organizations that have been around a long time and just kind of have always done things this way. Doesn't always mean a government agency is bureaucratic, but because they're very set systems based and very highly regulated, they can fall into this category, or people who come up through agencies where there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape can take this not very effective leadership style to an organization where it might just be like a terrible mismatch and not a good fit. So bureaucratic leadership style is everyone's lost in red tape. There's too many procedures. There's too many processes. Departments or actions are siloed. There isn't good cross-team communication or functionality. In these organizations or with this kind of leadership style, there's often a lot of barriers to volunteering. And so they're like, why do we never have enough volunteers? Like, well, look at how difficult your systems are, how many hoops or steps people have to jump through to support your organization. And it really is demoralizing and can have everyone, including volunteers, just feeling like they're cogs in a machine and they're not really treated as people with a range of emotions. So again, the rarely effective, kind of more micromanaging, harsher, more toxic leadership styles are in that autocratic, bureaucratic category. So if we're thinking about how we listen and learn and then lead, that ideal is going to feed automatically into some of these more effective leadership styles where power and decision making is, if not completely shared, at least there's a lot of input in all directions, from the grassroots people on the ground, which tend to be leaders of volunteers and the volunteers themselves interacting the most with the public and the community, where information can flow pretty freely all throughout the organization, and feedback is respected and listened to. If not every idea can be acted upon, sometimes people are going to suggest opposite courses of action, but at least having an environment with your organization where volunteers and employees or contractors, vendors, whoever you're working with in the community feels like they are heard and valued and respected, and are a fit for the mission, the cause, the different roles that everyone is doing towards that mission and cause. That's going to be a more effective leadership style, to be more inclusive and have more diversity of opinions, and then kind of work from consent and consensus to make major decisions for the agency. So I hope that you have enjoyed these Tuesday tips. Please do like and subscribe and share these videos. And hopefully I see you on Thursday the 8th. If not, then feel free to book me for the L Words session for your own agency, and I'll see you next time. Take care.